So, with that, I would like to officially open the conference and introduce our first plenary speaker, Dr. Attila Bint, who is an assistant professor at our department, and he is a member of a number of different research groups, and his main area of research is complex dynamic systems theory. And I would like to ask Attila to start the first plenary session today. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start presentation. So I would like to start with saying that academic writing is important for several reasons. Because it's important for successful students. So if a student wants to be successful, academic writing is important to be able to write a written assignment, a thesis, or a dissertation. It's also important for publishing academics, so if you want to have an academic career, it's also really important that an academic, a professor can write an academic paper. And it's also important if you want to be an influential researcher. And I would like to cite, quote, Ken Hyland, who is a well-known writing researcher. He says that we are ultimately defined and judged by our writing. So, therefore, I would say that it's important to know more about the writing process or the developmental process of academic writing. So that's why I started focusing on this, because I can inform instructors, so practitioners, I can inform fellow instructors who teach advanced writing courses or academic courses, and we can also design writing courses, so this is what I'm going to talk about later today with my colleague Nora Vincsnagy. When I entered ELTE in 2020, Eötvös gave me a course, advanced writing, and I had a kind of a dilemma how to teach academic writing or advanced writing. So I'm going to talk a bit about this issue and about the study that I conducted, which was one of the first studies, which was published in the DEAR volume. It's an annual volume, or now biannual volume, published by our department. In this study, I looked at the participants in advanced writing course. So I had 63 students. They wrote 2 essays, one at the beginning and one at the end. And I analyzed these essays with a pre-test, post-test design, and I focused on syntactic complexity. And the result was not that promising, because none of the indices changed significantly. So what to do next? So there was no development, so researchers' nightmare is this, and I was sort of crying that how can I publish this result? So what can I do? So I basically engaged in self-reflection, so I started to think about asking questions from myself. So what was the problem with the study? So my main question was that why didn't my students develop their syntax in writing? First I looked at myself, so maybe there were some problems with the instruction. The second was maybe there were some problems with the research design, but I'm not blaming the students, okay? So the students shouldn't be blamed. At that time in 2020, I saw a post on Twitter by Shunko Suzuki, who was a fellow PhD student at Lancaster University, and posted just a picture which says that why should I publish, how do I know whether my research is worth publishing, and actually the post says that found this book as enjoyable as Harry Potter series, I will use this book for my future academic writing module. I mean, that was a convincing post, so I immediately looked for this book, which is Adrian Wahlberg, so this is Shunko Suzuki, who actually, so that's a book, so English for Writing Research Papers, which was available online, and there were lots of good ideas in this textbook, and I was able to prepare for my first advanced writing course at the university. Since then, Shunko Suzuki, I would say, became a kind of a promising scholar, published in many different top journals, mainly with Judith Kormos. So that gave some sort of credibility to this book. Okay, so what was wrong with the instruction? My answer would be that, I mean, I use this book, which is highly reliable. Probably it was okay. I mean, we cannot be sure. So the second question was that what was wrong with my research design? I mean, that's another question, because if you look at, for example, one index, which was the mean length of syntax, mean length of sentence, which decreased, because I had 2 points in time, so one at the beginning of the course and at the end of the course. But the problem was that basically these figures show that the averages of mean lengths of sentence, and the question is that who is the average learner? So is there an average learner in this graph? And from, if you look at the participants, how they developed over time, we can see that the pink line shows the average, the mean values, but we can see that none of the participants actually follow exactly the same trajectory over time. So there is no such a thing as average learner. As we can see, development is dynamic, and also there is intra and inter-individual variability over time, and non-linearity. As you can see, the trajectories are moving up and down over time. So the question is that, is there a theory that acknowledges these features of development? I mean, at that time there was no Gemini, but if you ask the question from the Google Gemini, the answer is actually that yes, there is, it's called dynamic systems theory or complex dynamic systems theory or emergentism, and citing two major scholars, Diane Larson-Freeman and Marjolin Verspoor. So what can I do in this situation? Well, I mean, I was brave enough. I wrote an email to Marjolin Verspoor in 2020 September, so that was a long time ago. And luckily, I received an email in which she said that she is willing to help being a mentor for this project. So, welcome to the conference. So, I'm going to talk about the dynamics of academic writing development, and I'm going to present a study that I conducted myself, and Marjolin Verspoor was a co-researcher in this study. First, I would like to talk about dynamic systems, or dynamic usage-based approach, then some ideas about the features of academic writing, and then the study, so following methods, results, discussion, conclusion. Okay, so complex dynamic system theory can be seen as a meta theory. Basically, we have usage-based linguistics, which is per definition a dynamic view of language and also language development. So we have complex dynamic systems theory, usage-based linguistics, and that you can see that basically equals dynamic usage-based theory. I mean, in the literature, some scholars use CDST and some other scholars use dynamic usage-based theory, I would say interchangeably. Okay? So the main ideas in dynamic usage-based theory is that development process over time is dynamic, individual, and also context sensitive. So the study that I conducted here might not be applicable at another university because, I mean, context is highly important. So therefore, we have to consider individuals' context, their language experience, and also individuals per se. Okay, so from a UG perspective, so second language learning is basically an exemplar driven, that's what Langecker says. Basically, we are exploring the regularities and patterns in a second language, and through continuous experience and exposure to the second language. So this is what I'm going to, this is what I used in this study, so these notions. And also there are a lot of other factors which contribute to the development. So we have language acquisition in the center. Age can be a contributing factor. Learner's first language, we will see that's going to be highly important in this study. Aptitude, intelligence, motivation, type and degree of exposure, that's also really important, and context, obviously. And obviously the list can be continued, so there are other factors that can be that can affect the development. Also, initial conditions, that's a notion or abstraction in dynamic systems, which is also really important, because the actual level of development is dependent on the previous level. What does that mean? So, for example, in the advanced writing course, we have students from ELTE, so who attended academic skills 1 and 2 courses, so they know they have already mastered some basic skills or some skills of academic writing. But we also have Erasmus students who haven't or didn't learn academic skills, and therefore the initial conditions are different, and that's going to also affect the development that what they performance that they're going to show during the course. Also, it's really important that these systems are not isolated, they are connected to each other, and there is also influence on each other. So if you think about language, we have lexical, we have phonological system, we have syntactic system, morphological system. So when we are learning, for example, advanced tenses, that also affects our phonological system, because you have to learn how to pronounce those words. Okay? So we have seen this before. So that's the trajectory, kind of so the academic word list trajectories. And what we can see is that, and I have already mentioned, so that each learner is going to be different. They have their own trajectories, and that's why, I mean, one of the first studies was conducted by Diane Larson-Freeman, published in Applied Linguistics, in which she showed for learners how they developed in an idiosyncratic way, so in a basically displaying diverse trajectories over time. So the conclusion is that if we want to know more about the actual process or the developmental process, we must look at how different variables develop in individuals, and in this way we can make sure that what changes occur, in what manner, and probably what order. So there are some studies that I would like to present. So these studies were conducted from dynamic systems perspective and looking at writing development. The first was done by Rosmavati and looking at one participant, so these are case studies, and found a decline in subordination and an increase in phrasal complexity at an advanced level, whereas Wang and Tao found both synchronous and asynchronous development for subordination and phrasal complexity. Ho et al. From University of Groningen, so she was Marjolin's PhD student, and basically found quite mixed results. So there was no main conclusion from these studies. Okay. So another important notion from dynamic systems theory is the ergodicity principle, which actually says that findings from individual case studies cannot be generalized to the group and vice versa. Okay, so that's really important here. So I try to identify the research niche that I identified here, so that it would be interesting to see if there are general trends in development. Okay. So how can you do that? So when you have lots of participants and you want to actually see whether they develop in any of the indices, one thing that you can do is you can perform a dynamic growth modeling, which is a kind of a old-fashioned way of doing it. The first was done by Caspi, also from the University of Groningen, and she looked at 4 constructs: lexical complexity, lexical accuracy, syntactic complexity, syntactic accuracy. And actually, this is what she found. So that was one particular learner. These were the actual data, and then the models, creating 3 different models, tried to replicate the development. This is also what I did in my PhD. I had also one particular learner, and I also created the models. However, that's not the best way of doing it, and now there are modern advancement in statistics, so the generalized additive mixed modeling is going to be used here, which actually analyzes a nonlinear trend while taking individual variability over time and variation among individuals into account. Okay, so that's basically the definition, and there are several studies that use these GAN, for example, Kim, Fenninger, Köylü, but the learners were different, and obviously the context was different. Okay, so in order to I talk about the research depth, so the development of several indices is explored at the academic level in more depth by examining the coordination dynamics of linguistic subsystems in the learner's language, and we use a dynamic usage-based approach. However, today I'm just going to talk about the individual indices and not about that whether there is some order in development. Okay, so now let's talk about the features of academic writing, which is also important to identify. So basically, academic writing or English academic writing follows specific language conventions and communicative purposes within particular specific discourse communities, and it demands a well-defined argument and topic in an argumentative essay or a dissertation, evidence-based arguments, clarity of expression, formal vocabulary, and logical organization of paragraphs and sentences. And also some other components can be added. Okay, and the most common quantifiable linguistic resources to communicate ideas and constructs are basically the types of sentence constructions, the types of verb choices, the types of commonly used word combinations, so collocations, and types of cohesive devices. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about now. And also it's important to note that second language academic writing might be influenced by the learner's first language, as I have mentioned before. So language acquisition is affected by our first language. Okay, and also by culture. That's an interesting addition to this study. Why? So because language acquisition is not the result of an innate language instinct, but rather it emerges from social interaction, also cognitive pattern spotting, and repeated experience of language in specific context. Okay, so I mentioned culture, so this idea is very much in line with Kaplan's culture differences in rhetorical styles, and I try to bring in this distinction or dichotomy, so the reader and writer responsibility approach, which basically explains some of the results in this study. So the reader responsibility approach, the reader is responsible to write their paper in a way that let's start with the writer responsibility approach. So in this case, the writer is responsible to write the document in a way that it is going to be easily read by the reader. And the other way is basically the inverse of this. And Hungarian language probably belongs to the reader responsibility approach, whereas English belongs to the other, and that's caused some problems in this study. Okay, so in English academic writing, syntactic structures are highly specialized and also uses constructions that are rarely found in colloquial conversations. So Weber published many papers on these findings, but it's also important that sophisticated construction should not be at the expense of clarity of expression. Okay? And also, the textbook that I used, Wahlberg, says that conciseness and clarity over long sentences is really important. Okay? Wahlberg had I would say, a really important quote here, and probably caused some, I would say, interesting outcomes in the field of academia, that short sentences are not a sign of inelegance and superficiality, but a way to avoid ambiguity and being misunderstood in academic writing. Okay? So, we're going to come back to this a bit later. So basically saying that Hungary students, because they follow, based on their first language, we tend to write really long sentences in Hungarian, and that's what we also use in English, but the English uses a different rhetorical style. So you have to write the paper in a way that the reader is not forced to read once more the paper. Okay? So academic words is characterized by genre-specific word choices. It uses precise, large, and formal vocabulary. And the addition here that we also looked at academic collocations. So for example, briefly describe, accept responsibility. These are examples for academic collocations. Coherence and cohesion, these are also important constructs to look at in academic writing. Coherence is basically the understanding that the reader derives from the text, and it depends on prior knowledge, reading skills, and cohesion cues, whereas cohesion is the linguistic cues that permit the reader to connect the ideas in a particular context, a particular text. And I looked at local, global, and text cohesion. For example, overlapping words, ideas between sentences, lexical and semantic overlap, and text cohesion refers to the entire text. Okay, so some previous studies on academic writing development. Obviously, previous studies were in different instructional contexts, which also affects the outcome because they are set in different contexts, at different proficiency levels, and also in terms of complexity measures and academic words. There are also many different results because obviously researchers use different indices which cannot be compared. Okay, so the research gap one is basically that previous studies have not looked at other aspects of language use. So for example, clarity of expressions, idiomacy in terms of collocations, and style. Okay. The other major trends, as most studies have investigated general trends in pre-test, post-test studies like Knock et al. Or Mazutov and Kormos, and thanks to the advancement to statistics, so we have the GAM analysis, so there are some other greater number of detailed longitudinal studies that use the dynamic usage-based theory and using this GAM analysis. However, very few have looked at how measures interact. Okay, so that was and also an important research gap here. Okay, when it comes to the features of academic writing, there are also mixed results. So, for example, Alexopoulou and Ley et al. Lu found length-based indices tend to increase in academic writing, whereas Crockett-Toll, Mazzucato, and Kormash found that length-based indices actually decrease. Also, Leitao found that subordination decreases over time. Okay? Okay, so there might be a limit to growth in sentence length, so that was the idea here, because longer sentences may affect readability and clarity of expression. Okay? Wahlberg actually says that the maximum sentence length that we should aim for is 25 words in academic writing. And also, if you look at the APA 7, I mean, there is no exact number that they recommend, but it says or suggests that writers should not overuse long sentences to avoid incomprehensible and difficult language. So if you look at these examples, you can read the first one, which is one long sentence, and then in the second round you can read the shorter sentences, and I'm interested in your ideas. So quickly read the long sentence one. It's not from our field, it's totally different field of science. Okay, so probably you can see that the shorter sentences are easier to understand because they are split up into more sentences. So in the first one we have one sentence which is 71 words, and in the second, on the right side of the slide, you could see that we have 4 sentences and they are from 7 to 24 words, and it's much easier to understand. Okay, so I would like to invite you to some quick guessing game about sentence length. So please scan the QR code. So the first question, so what was the average sentence length in Shakespeare's time? I mean, that comes from Wahlberg, 2016.
Do you mean in Shakespeare's dramas, in literary works?
Okay, that's what I don't know precisely. So that's I'm trying to quote Wahlberg. So we don't know whether it's academic text or literary text. So that's a problem. Yes. So the answer is actually 45 words. So in the middle. So actually you guessed pretty well. So that was 45 words. Okay. So the second question is that what was the average sentence length 150 years ago? Okay, so the correct answer is 29 words. So there is a decline from Shakespeare's time. And the final one is that what's the average sentence length today? It's kind of competing. So the correct answer is in the middle, so from 15 to 18. Obviously, it's not a precise study. I mean, that would be interesting if someone finds a study which actually reports on sentence length. But what we can see here is that there is a decline in sentence length. So Shakespeare time 45 words, 450 years ago 29 words, and today is only 18 and 21 words. Okay? But when we look at academic writing, so Wahlberg recommends 25 words as the mean sentence length. Okay? So, let's move on to vocabulary. So some previous studies on vocabulary, Mazutov and Kormos found that the higher group, so upper intermediate group, improved in using academic words in their text, which was an intensive EAP program, whereas the intermediate group did not develop in academic words. However, Knock et al., Köylő and Storch, Naomi Storch, so they did not find any improvements in academic words over time. Okay? When it comes to the development of collocational competence, the main idea here is that this developmental process is slow, and we need a lot of time to see some improvements. So 4-6 months are not seen enough at university level, because collocations, the monster collocations, is not that easy. Okay? When it comes to cohesion, with my fellow researcher Abdi Tabari, we looked at cohesion development in writing, and we found increases in local, global, and also text cohesion indices. But that study was conducted in the United States. Whereas Gu et al. Found decrease in some cohesion indices. So let's talk about the current study. Okay, so what we did is that we had 30 L1 Hungary University students. We looked at lots of different measures. One of them was the human scores of writing quality and several linguistic complexity indices over one academic semester. And the students wrote 10 essays over time, and the intervention included comprehensive feedback on their writing each week, and expectation was that each learner will have their own learning trajectory and some improvements in some of the indices. Okay? So the first research question was that to what extent do learners improve in academic writing based on human scores of writing quality? And the expectation was that obviously they should improve over time. Why? Because they receive a great deal of exposure to academic text, so they read lots of academic text. They receive explicit instruction on various aspects of academic writing, and they are also asked to self-assess and rewrite their essays. The second research question was to what extent do syntactic construction change? The expectation was that the students will write overly long sentences at the beginning of the course, because they think that since in Hungarian academic writing there are long sentences, and obviously after the instruction they will decrease their sentence lengths. Okay? As I have already mentioned, Hungarian follows a reader responsibility style in which long sentences are permitted and also preferred. But English academic writing follows a writer responsibility type, so therefore there is this kind of a mismatch, so that causes a possible decrease in sentence lengths. Okay, the third research question was to what extent does the use of academic words develop? And the expectation was that obviously they will improve because they will work with the academic word list, they will have some tasks related to that, and that's why they're going to use more academic words in their writing. Okay, this is what I said. So the fourth research question, to what extent does the use of academic collocations develop? So the literature says that it's not, it requires a lot of time, so we did not expect significant increase as in academic words. Because obviously it's a kind of a struggle with the acquisition of academic collocations. And the last question that I'm presenting here is about cohesion, focusing on global cohesion, mainly that they will improve cohesion. So when it comes to the methods, I had 30 Hungarian Eötvös learners, 24 female, 6 male. They were OTAC students, so the MA double major teacher from the MA double major teaching training program. and they have already attended the academic skills 1 and 2 courses. Okay, so they had 90 minutes. I mean, that was the advanced writing course on a weekly basis. And as you can see, they received explicit instruction from using the English for Writing research papers textbook. They also were asked to read academic texts, and they composed their weekly assignments, weekly essays, and they were also asked to self-assess their essays. So the students were required to, using a self-assessment rubric, and then also they needed to respond to feedback that I gave them during the course. Okay, I use this course book that I have mentioned, but we also use the overseas, so outstanding thesis, so students read some outstanding theses, and they were asked to, using a kind of an evaluation sheet to evaluate these theses. Okay, in the book, we focused on breaking up long sentences, structuring sentences and paragraphs, how to be concise, and how to avoid ambiguity. And also we looked at Gyula's, Tanko's paraphrasing, summarizing, and synthesizing course book. Okay, so this was the basically the design of the study. I used a kind of a Latin square design, and in this case, none of the students responded to the same writing point at the same time, because they, for example, participant 1 responded at week 1, writing prompt A, whereas participants 2 writing prompt B. Okay, so that was important because probably the writing prompt can have an effect on the outcome. Okay, so altogether I have 300 argumentative essays. It's not not one course, but multiple courses. Altogether there were around 80,000 words. Okay, these were the writing prompts I collected from the University of Michigan's. There was a kind of a collection of myth in second language learning. The topic, why second language learning? Because these learners are second language learners and they are more or less familiar and probably, hopefully, interested in second language learning. Obviously, not all writing prompts are equally interesting for everyone, but since there were 12 writing prompts and they had to respond to 10, and they had the chance to skip 2 writing prompts, so that gives some flexibility to the students. Okay, this is the self-assessment or teacher assessment rubric that I created, some sorts of can-do statements using Gyula's book in the 13 from 13 to 15, and then obviously focusing on Wahlberg's textbook, so I created some can-do statements and the students had to indicate whether they agree or strongly agree, etc. with the statements. Okay, so I completed the same rubric and gave also detailed direct feedback with corrections, and the students revised their essays and they sent back to me for a final review. I used the dynamic written corrective feedback, which was created by Hartshorn's team, which, I mean, more or less I tried to follow it, but not in every sense. It was timely, so I waited a couple of days, so there was no 2-3 weeks after they composed the essay. It was constant because every week I provided the feedback. It was meaningful, so they understood what I was saying, because we used a kind of a code. And it was manageable. I mean, that was the problematic part because it was quite long and it was also hard work for me because looking at all these essays every week, that was really time consuming. Okay, so when it comes to the indices that I calculated, I used the human scores of writing quality. I also filled in self-assessment or teacher assessment rubrics, and I did it twice, so there was I also calculated the intra-rater reliability, which was sort of acceptable, and the final scores were average scores between the first and the second rating. when it comes to syntax, I used many different syntactic measures, mean length of sentence, mean length of clause, and some refined syntactic measures, but I will focus only on the mean length of sentence, which was statistically significant here. Okay? When it comes to academic words, I use the academic word list, which was created by Coxhead, and some other measures, but it turned out that academic words was the significant. Okay? When it comes to collocations, there is an academic collocation list by Ackerman and Chen. For example, this list includes examples like dramatic change, effect, increase, and there is this highlighter which can be found online, and you just copy-paste the text into it and provides and highlights basically the academic collocations. Finally, for cohesion, I had several cohesion metrics. For example, the adjacent overlap sentences and paragraphs, or synonym overlap, or latent semantic analysis. Okay, so these are the tools that I use that can be found on Kyle and Crossley's website. These are NLP tools. I use the TALES, SINLP, syntactic complexity, and the lexical diversity analyzer. And this was the new one which I hadn't used before. That was the academic collocation highlighter, really easy to use. You just need to copy paste the text and click, and then it highlights whether the text contains any academic collocations. So that's the website that you can also find the tools. I use it also with my students in the corpus linguistic course. They have some bad experience with them because none of these, it's quite difficult to use the tools. Not that usage is difficult, but sometimes even downloading and making it working, that's not easy, okay? But it's there and it's really useful. Okay, so when it comes to the data analysis for the questions, to answer the research questions from 1 to 5, I use the generalized additive mixed model, and I implemented in R with different packages, so the ngCV package, and also I had the Itzadu package. So let's see the results. Okay. So when it comes to the human scores of writing quality, you can see that there is an upward trend over time. So the participants increase, but obviously these are my scores, and probably that's not that reliable. But I rated the essays twice, so that's accepted. What we have to also look at is the estimated degrees of freedom, which is in this case 1. It means that there is a linear relationship, and then we can see that trajectory is quite kind of a straight line, straight upward line. Okay, when it comes to the mean length of sentence, we can see that it's not a straight line, but there's some curve in it. And also, if you look at the EDF value, it's 1.7, so that also confirms this non-linear trajectory over time. And we can see that it is a statistically significant finding. So basically, learners decrease their sentence length over time following the instruction from Wahlberg's textbook. When it comes to academic word list, we can also see that it's also a perfectly linear relationship. So participants improve the usage of academic words, which was obviously expected because they were exposed to so they were trained how to implement or how to use the academic words. They had tasks related to that. When it comes to the academic collocations list, that was not statistically significant. Probably the reason is that we didn't use the academic collocation list as the academic word list, so they were not trained to implement more academic collocations. So probably that's one of the reasons. Okay, when it comes to cohesion, only one index, which was the EOP, so that's the global cohesion index. So the index which increased over time, so the adjacent overlap or paragraph index increased over time. So now let's discuss the ideas here. So I use the DUB framework, and which basically says that language development emerges from social interaction, cognitive pattern spotting, and the repeated experience of language in specific context. Okay? So the students developed in human scores of writing quality, mean length of sentence, academic word list, and the cohesion index, but not in the academic collocation index. So that was the main finding. I mean, I haven't talked about the R values, but this is something that you also have to look at how the model fit. That was quite low, and it suggested that time was found to be a definite driver of development as demonstrated by the significant p-values. However, time was not the only driver, so other factors might have contributed to the significant p-values. Okay? So, when it comes to the human scores of writing quality, there's an alignment with Mazutov and Korma studies. Also, they saw an increase or development in an EAP course over 1 month. But it's also quite unusual because there are several other studies which actually found the opposite. When it comes to the syntax, so that was something surprising, that students used longer sentences early on, but there was a decrease in sentence length. But it's quite interesting that some other studies, Li et al., that study was conducted in the Chinese context, and they also found that the mean length of sentence and also the dependent clause, or the subordination, decreases over time, whereas Li et al. Found an increase in mean length of sentence. Okay? So how we can explain is that we can explain with the cultural differences in rhetorical style. So that's basically the learners started to adopt the English academic writing style. So that's why basically they started to use shorter sentences over time. Okay. Also, they received feedback from me, and then they also completed some exercises in class that may have contributed to that development. Okay? When it comes to the lexicon, the main finding was that there was a significant improvement in academic words, which is kind of there's a misalignment with Knoch et al. And Storch et al., who did not find improvements in academic words. And probably the reasons might be that in these studies, the participant did not read in great detail, did not have explicit instruction, and had limited opportunities to compose essays, which was not the case in this study, because the learners also received feedback, read a lot, and they were instructed to use more academic words. Okay, when it comes to collocations, we should see a clear upward trend, but there was no statistically significant main and interaction effects over time. The issue was that probably it takes more time to use academic collocations, as we have seen in Gilstad's study. Okay, when it comes to cohesion, out of the 8 indices, only 1, so the global cohesion increased over time, which was probably, Crossley also found the same in the participants in the lexical overlap, so some very similar indices, and also the WW found significant increases in global cohesion. Okay, so to conclude, so the understanding of overall patterns in development of syntax, vocabulary, collocations, and cohesion in second language writing. So that was the main aim here, and I used GAN analysis, which actually explores the joint development of indices and whether one construct developed before the other. I mean, this is not something that I talked about the different orders here, but the individual indices. So obviously there are some limitations that we have to consider. First, we have that the ergodicity problem, so we cannot generalize these findings to other contexts because of the differences in initial conditions. As you have seen in this context, the Hungarian students have already attended academic skills 1 and 2, so they had some knowledge about how to write academic text. Obviously the course contained, included some other students, but they were excluded from the study. Okay, so basically the findings of this study support the main principles, tenets of the DUD approach, so the role of frequency by exposure to exemplars. So the participants were exposed to the academic word list many times, and also by using the dynamic written corrective feeder, the participants were frequently alerted to split up longer sentences and pay more attention to cohesive devices. So some pedagogical implications for ELTE instructors. The main message is that it's possible to help students improve their academic writing within 1 semester, but it's time consuming, both for both parties, for the students and for the instructors. And also self-assessment rubrics might help to draw attention to the various aspects of language. So by completing the self-assessment rubrics, students can be alerted to pay attention to some areas. Okay, so I would like to finish the presentation with a quote from, again, from Ken Hyland. So we are what we write. So thank you for attending the conference, and I hope you enjoy the presentation and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent opening to the conference. We have time for a couple of questions. So if you want to ask. Yes, Sandra.
Can I start? Hello, thank you for the presentation. Extremely interesting. One specific detail that I'd like to go into, and this is the interaction between the increasing in shorter sentences and the syntactic complexity. And then on one of your latter slides, you are writing that this may be due to an increased number of nominalizations and non-finite verbs. But have you actually checked this interaction? Probably students actually just learned from you how to cut up sentences like two coordinated clauses, and then they become two separate sentences, and so just solve this simple way. Which one?
Well, I checked lots of other indices, and none of the other indices actually were significant. So only the mean length of sentence.
Could you go back to that slide?
Yes.
That is about syntactic complexity.
It was in the results. I think, yeah, it was in the results. Yeah.
Shortening. Is there a slide about the nominalizations?
Yes.
It's difficult to measure, but non-finite verbs or non-finite clauses. What the literature says that writers use more normalizations, but it was not in the case in this. But did you check
Yes,
if there is
yes.
an interaction between shorter sentences and nominalizations and non-finite?
No, I haven't checked whether there is an interaction. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this great presentation. But when you introduced the study, you mentioned that interactions are really important when it comes to complex dynamic systems theory. So I was wondering whether you looked at the interactions, similar questions, but not just within syntax, but syntax and vocabulary cohesion.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I have done, but I was preparing to also talk about it, but I decided to cut because I think it was, couldn't talk about it. But I checked, yes, in the final paper which was submitted, it's under review, there is also interaction, looking at interaction. And actually what we found that these indices, the 4 indices that were statistically significant, they developed in synchrony in their participants. So that's what we did.
Thank you very much
Thank
again.
you. Thank you.
And